One of the major geopolitical developments of 2021 has been the heightened tensions in the Indo Pacific. Mainland China increased its military pressure against Taiwan. According to Taiwan's defense minister, the number of Chinese military planes probing Taiwan's air defense zone increased from 380 last year to 940 as of December 22nd this year. He called the cross-strait tensions the most critical in 40 years. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin called the recent Chinese military operations near Taiwan rehearsals. Let's look at how the United States and its allies have responded. Hello, welcome to Lei's Real Talk. I'm Lei. Happy holidays. China's actions in the region have led to profound changes in the landscape of international relations, military cooperation, and the strategic partnership among Western nations and their allies in the Indo Pacific. There were 8 major developments in 2021 that will have a lasting impact on the region in 2022 and beyond. Established in 2007, the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue between the United States, Japan, Australia, and India is an informal mechanism for senior officials from these 4 nations to discuss regional security issues. It was largely inactive until 2017, when the leaders of the 4 countries decided at the ASEAN summit in Manila that the mechanism should be revived at the level of foreign ministers. The Biden administration elevated the Quad meetings to heads of state, and the 4 leaders held a video summit in March 2021. On September 24th, the 4 leaders met face-to-face in a historic first-time meeting at the White House. Last November, Australia participated in the Quad's joint military exercises after a 13-year absence, and in April 2021, the Quad held its first joint military exercises with France in the Bay of Bengal. On September 15, 2021, Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States announced the signing of a historic security agreement, Aukus. The primary goal is for the United Kingdom and the United States to assist Australia in building a fleet of nuclear-powered submarines, as well as sharing cyber capabilities, artificial intelligence, quantum and undersea technologies, and more. This is the most substantial defense partnership the 3 countries have agreed to since World War II. It is the first time in over 60 years that the United States has shared its nuclear submarine technology. Australia will thus become the 7th country in the world to have a nuclear-powered submarine. On November 19th, U.S. Indo Pacific Regional Coordinator Kurt Campbell said that Aukus is an open framework and that sooner or later, Asian and European countries would join in. The Five Eyes is an intelligence-sharing coalition of 5 English-speaking countries: the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. It has imposed numerous sanctions against the CCP and other totalitarian regimes for their egregious rights abuse. New Zealand is seen as the weakest link in the Five Eyes alliance because of its close trade relations with China. New Zealand's economic dependence on China has caused it to waver and sometimes fail to participate in the alliance's joint statements condemning the CCP. However, the formation of AUKUS was a turning point for New Zealand. It was the first nation to support AUKUS and express the desire to join the alliance. New Zealand's Prime Minister has publicly admitted that New Zealand's differences with the CCP have become more difficult to reconcile.
And it will not have escaped the attention of anyone here that as China's role in the world grows and changes, the differences between our systems and the interests and values that shape those systems are becoming harder to reconcile.
On December 1st, 2021, former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said at an online meeting with Taiwanese think tanks
A Taiwan emergency is a Japanese emergency, and therefore an emergency for the Japan-U.S. alliance.
His comment sparked international attention on the Japan-U.S. alliance. In April 2021, the Japanese Prime Minister was the first head of state to visit the White House after Joe Biden took office. The U.S.-Japan summit addressed many issues that touched a nerve in Beijing: the Diaoyu Islands, human rights issues in Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and high-tech industrial supply chains. In its joint statement issued after the summit, the Japan-U.S. alliance was defined as the core that guarantees the region's security. South Korea is Australia's fourth largest trading partner. The two countries have a long history of military cooperation. On December 13th, South Korea and Australia elevated their relations to a comprehensive strategic partnership by signing a defense agreement worth $1 billion Australian dollars. It's the largest arms purchase agreement Australia has ever signed with an Asian country.
Together we share a view about the role of liberal democracies in today's world, and particularly in the Indo Pacific.
Although Korean President Moon Jae-in said his trip to Australia is unrelated to China and claimed that South Korea was to balance its relationships with the U.S. allies and China, South Korea's willingness to form a comprehensive strategic partnership with Australia at a time when Australia's relationship with China is very tense is a bold move. Japan, the U.S., Australia, Canada, and Germany also held their annual joint military exercise in the Philippine Sea from November 21st to 30th. It was the first time in 20 years that Germany participated in the Indo Pacific exercises. A little earlier, on November 5th, the German frigate Byron arrived in Tokyo, becoming the first German warship to make a port call in Japan in nearly 20 years. One commentator said, "It's interesting that the two defeated World War II countries, Japan and Germany, have joined forces with the victorious countries to confront a new threat, Communist China." The frigate deployment marks a shift in Germany's strategy toward the Indo Pacific region. Three-quarters of France's exclusive economic zone is located in the Indo Pacific region, and more than 1.6 million French citizens live in these territories. France has more than 7,000 troops deployed in the Indo Pacific region, second only to the United States. In May 2021, French forces held a joint ground force training with Japanese and American troops for the first time. On December 17th, the U.S. and French navies signed a strategic interoperability framework document. The agreement resulted from negotiations that began 2 years ago and paves the way for increased cooperation between the two navies over the next 2 decades. On December 17th, French Defense Minister visited New Delhi for the 3rd annual Franco-Indian Defense Dialogue. She called India France's most important strategic partner in the Indo-Pacific region and said France is committed to providing India with the best defense technology. In 2020, despite the financial constraints caused by the pandemic, the United Kingdom invested an additional £16.5 billion to support British military operations in the Indo-Pacific region and said it would build new military bases in the South China Sea. On March 16, 2021, the UK government published a report titled "Global Britain in a Competitive Age," which is described as the largest and most comprehensive assessment of Britain's foreign and defense policy since the end of the Cold War 30 years ago. It established a tilt to the Indo-Pacific approach as Britain's strategic focus. On July 6, the Queen Elizabeth Carrier Strike Group passed through the Suez Canal, heading to the South China Sea and the Western Pacific for the first time since 1997. At the end of July, it entered the disputed waters of the South China Sea and later held joint military exercises with the Malaysian Navy. It crossed the Taiwan Strait between Taiwan and the Philippines to Japan, where it held the first Japan-UK joint exercises south of Okinawa. In October, it participated in the 5th anniversary exercise of Britain, Australia, Malaysia, New Zealand, and Singapore.
Following on from the strike group's inaugural deployment, the United Kingdom will permanently assign 2 ships in the region from later this year, as well as contributing a littoral response group in the coming years to come.
2021 has been eventful, and we'll keep an eye on 2022. On a lighter note, a fan suggested that I teach a few words of Chinese at the end of each video. How about we learn the names of these countries in Chinese? Chinese called China, 中国. It means the Middle Kingdom. The United States is called 美国. It literally means the beautiful country. The Chinese name for the United Kingdom came from the name England, and it is called 英国, meaning the outstanding country. France is called 法国, the country of law. Germany, or Deutschland, is called 德国, the country of virtue. These names were given based on the translations from more than 100 years ago by the officials of the Qin dynasty. The Chinese people in those days were very gracious in giving nice names to foreign powers. More than a century later, China continues to command the world's attention as the Middle Kingdom. I hope America remains the beautiful, and other European powers, the United Kingdom, France, and Germany, will stay true to their names, outstanding, law-abiding, and virtuous, as my ancestors from a century ago had wished. That's all for today. You can watch my video on China-Russia relations and how the world's powers have responded to the Beijing Winter Olympics. That's all for today. Thank you. See you next time.